Katsitsakwas na yujat stanu wakenyahtu Kanienkehaka na kayakto tatanu Kanehsatake na ganagere. Before you all start getting confused, especially the translators, I'll start speaking into English because I've had bad experiences actually with people who think that I should be speaking French and English first. My Mohawk name is Katsitsakwas, and Mohawk is what you know us, but we are called people of the Flint, Kanienkehaka. Our language is Kanienkehaka, and I'm from the community of Kanehsatake, the one with the golf course, 62 kilometers northwest of Montreal. We're not the bridge. It's a very ancient community and one that existed when the peacemaker Deganaweeda was going around all the Iroquois communities. And we were the first community to accept the Kanienkehaka, which is our laws and constitution, the great laws of peace. Nyawa to Anna. The red one looks like a clown's nose.
You want the red one?
It's okay.
Sorry.
The red one means the trickster's here, but anyways, trickster's gone. So I'm very pleased, and I want to really thank Anna for her very heartwarming introduction. I very much appreciate it. Nobody can do this kind of work without support from their families, people in the community, and I just want to note that we do have another person from the community of Kanehsatake who was on the front lines with me. Clifton Nicholas is sitting up here, so I just want to acknowledge his presence as well. So if you'll bear with me, and if my papers don't fly away, my notes, we'll try and get through this as with the least amount of pain as possible. How many of you here are university students? Okay, so how many of you here know, how many of you here are professors? Okay, so you'll be writing notes. And then how many of you here are just activists from the communities and who care about this planet and this land? So the majority of you here. And how many of you know the real history of Canada? Very few, very few. It's always good to know who my audience is, because sometimes I just assume that after all these years of doing this work that people know the history of residential school, know the history of colonization, and the fact that colonization continues today in Canada and in the US. We are not invisible minorities. We are not minorities. We are not immigrants. We are the first peoples of this land. We're the first peoples who maybe possibly have relatives in Asia, but our people occupied this part of North America for thousands, if not millions of generations. We did not come here through the Bering Strait, although maybe some people did. But I just want to educate you on that, because this is the kind of logic that private property law is based upon in Canada and the US. It's the doctrine of discovery. It's terra nullius. And it's the churches, specifically the Catholic Church, that allowed people like Christopher Columbus to come here and say, well, there's no Christians living here, That means they're not human beings. That means you can claim sovereignty on those lands that you discover. And that's exactly what Canada is still practicing. Canada still has that notion that we gave up our land because we adopted Christianity. We adopted the land. We adopted all the things of this slavery-driven colonial structure that exists today, and the contrary is what is true. I'm going to read you something from the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, affirming that all doctrines, policies, and practices based on or advocating superiority of peoples or individuals, sorry to the translators, on the basis of national origin or racial, religious, ethnic, or cultural differences are racist, scientifically false, legally invalid, morally condemnable, and socially unjust. And this is from the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which says that state parties to the Present Covenant shall promote the realization of the right of self-determination and shall respect that right in conformity with the provisions of the Charter of the United Nations. So the Charter of the United Nations came after World War II. So much war going on, so they said, let's not make a mistake, let's all join together, let's all create peace around the world, which was probably good for about maybe 10 minutes, as we know. It's a very sad kind of reality that the Charter of the United Nations, which is supposed to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, and the dignity and worth of the human person, and the equal rights of men and women, of nations large and small. And the government of Canada, the present government of Canada, and I know I'm going to offend some people who may be liberals, or NDP hasn't gotten in yet, so. But there hasn't been any government of Canada that has been willing to decolonize, that has been willing to actually enter into a process of true reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Yeah, we had an apology for the Indian residential school. But as the museum in Winnipeg, the Human Rights Museum in Winnipeg says, it's cultural genocide. We don't want to go too far because they call it actual genocide. Because maybe there's going to be more law, there's going to be more legal actions in the courts. But you know, one of the things that Stephen Harper said, and this is from Gathering Strength as well in Canada's Aboriginal Action Plan, the attitudes of racial and cultural superiority led to the suppression of Aboriginal cultural and values, and languages as well, they should add. As a country, we are burdened by past actions that resulted in weakening the identity of Aboriginal peoples, suppressing their languages and cultures, and outlawing spiritual practices. We must acknowledge that the result of these actions was the erosion of the political, economic, and social systems of Aboriginal people and nations. Nice words, but they don't really mean anything. It's good for somebody way over in Norway or in France or England to see this on the website. But the actual reality is the contrary. Since the apology, the government of Canada has continued the status quo. In fact, it's even worse because we've had that huge omnibus bill, which doesn't legally oblige any corporation or entity, third-party interests to develop resources upon our lands. And as we know, one of the major issues right now in Canada are the pipelines. And there are people from the pipelines that have entered into our communities, and this is their argument. This is the argument that they use for us or against us to kind of make us think that, you know, and they come in with this attitude that we're simpletons, right? We don't look at the internet and we don't read. The pipelines are going to happen anyways, and I'm quoting from them. So you may as well, thank you, you may as well benefit economically from it, and you may as well have the jobs. And most recently, the Edmonton Journal talked about this private meeting that was going on. Sorry, my middle-aged mind is forgetting the name of the place. But what they talked about is, well, let's create this multi-billion dollar trust fund for communities affected by the pipelines where they're going to be touching, and for First Nations. It's nice bait, eh? It's like, let's reel them in. You know, we're going to give you a multi-million-dollar trust fund. You may not be able to drink your water, but you'll be rich. You may not be able to shower or wash your dishes, but hey, you'll be rich. We can import it from China, like we're doing that right now. China's going to do everything for us. So it's really ridiculous what this government is actually doing. And they seem to take on, whenever they know something is precious to us, they'll do exactly the opposite. INAC has this great, you know, they give out there's these SHIRK grants, and those of you who are in universities know about all these wonderful grants. We've been the most studied group of people in the world, and yet we still have the highest social problems, highest dropout rates. And then we have the murdered and missing Indigenous women in Canada, and a fascist tyrant who is saying, no, we're not going to have an inquiry. Why? Because, well, economically, you know, it's not viable. How is this going to benefit Canadians? How is it going to benefit Indigenous women if we do an inquiry? But there's another part of this puzzle that we're talking about, and that's a national plan of action, which Indigenous women's groups have been calling upon Canada for quite a long time. The Committee for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women has called upon Canada to create a national plan of action specifically on the murdered and missing Indigenous women, and they have not yet. In 2006, the chiefs of police developed a resolution at their annual General Assembly, and they said, we're going to develop a protocol on how to deal with murdered and missing Indigenous women in Canada, and they haven't done it yet. So it's like, wait, hey, words on paper. We love paper, don't we? We love paper because it shows us how it expands our libraries. Because how many commissions are sitting in Parliament, like the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, with wonderful recommendations on decolonization, wonderful recommendations on how to decolonize, how to undo the negative effects of colonization. They're wonderful. They sit and they're great for university students to write papers on, right? Here's the recommendations. But nothing actually happens. Why? Because there is a government, and I'm not going to say that this government is alone. Kelowna wasn't such a great thing. I'm sad to tell you. I went to some of those so-called consultations under the Liberal government of Kelowna, and their education plan was not that much better than what the Conservatives have been throwing around. So please don't be fooled by other parties, because there are friends when they're not in power. And then I think that's what's missing, is that they're always looking to the next election rather than looking at what are the true moral issues that need to be addressed, what are the true issues that need to be happening, and in understanding what self-determination is for Indigenous peoples. We have been dispossessed of our lands and territories. We are dispossessed of our languages and our culture. And people will say, well, it's because you wanted it, right? You agreed to this, I'm sorry, but we can't help it that your ancestors gave away all your land. Well, they didn't give away our land. What they did was they made agreements, and sometimes under coercion. There are treaties where the people were under duress, and they said, it's a toss-up between whether we're going to eat or whether we're going to fight. And that's what happened to a lot of our ancestors. It wasn't just about signing a treaty and getting a few beads for it, or getting pieces of lands reserved for Indians, and living on those lands. It goes much more fundamentally deeper. It's a future generation. I guess she doesn't like what I'm saying, so I better change my tune. No, I think it's wonderful. I don't mind. We need to be reminded. We need to be reminded of who we're doing this for, and the future generations, and her children and her grandchildren. So please. And the government of Canada has said constantly that the UN Declaration, it's really like, it goes against the Canadian Constitution, and Indigenous peoples are going to have more rights, and it's only aspirational. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights that was created after World War II That's aspirational. But what was required of every UN member state was to implement it, adopt it, absorb it into their human rights domestic legislation, to be practiced amongst society, to be practiced amongst the people. And of course, yes, it doesn't reflect the Canadian Constitution. Because the Canadian Constitution, really to me, in my mind and in my perspective, is really about colonization and assimilation. So yeah, it's true, it doesn't reflect the Canadian Constitution. Because where else in the world do you say we recognize and affirm the Aboriginal people's rights? This is section 35 of the Constitution. I'm not quoting it, I'm just kind of loosely quoting it. And then I remember seeing this YouTube video of the Queen of England saying, you know, I'm the Queen of Canada, and it's such a pleasure for me to be here. And she was talking about that particular section 35, that they, Canada, would define what Aboriginal rights was. So that means every time we say, no, we never gave up this land. No, we never ceded this land. No, you cannot come here because this is a sacred part of our territory. We have medicines here. This is our traditional. We have to go to the courts. We have to go to the courts to fight in a foreign court on top of that. And it costs millions of dollars. And maybe there's the exceptional lawyer who will do it pro bono. But they got to eat too. And so what's happening today when we see the Chilcotin case, whether it's Delgamuc, the Supreme Court of Canada, and there are wonderful things. There are some great potential decisions within the Supreme Court of Canada. But first, number one, Canada has yet to implement any of those decisions. And number two, it's a narrow definition of what Aboriginal title is. And so I don't believe that we have to go into the Supreme Court of Canada. I think we have every right to blockade. We have every right to stop Enbridge and TransCanada. And I say so with knowing that many times people will put their lives on the line, and it's not because they want to. Nobody in their right mind wants to put their lives on the line. I'm sorry. If we had a choice to redo July 11th of 1990 and the Oka crisis, and if we had a chance that this would have been done without the violence, that would have been good. But the strange thing about human nature is that we're really good under crisis, huh? If there's a war somewhere, somebody's rights are being violated, we're going to demonstrate and we're going to say to the government, we don't like this. And we're going to unite together when there's a natural disaster, and we're going to send money to the Red Cross, we're going to send money to all these UN agencies, so that they can buy food and water and make some sanitation for these people who are affected by war and affected by natural disasters. But yet, in the meantime, the status quo continues. In the meantime, it's okay. Until it actually touches us, we do not react. And that's what needs to be changed within society. And I see all of you here today. It's because you want that change. You need that change. And I'm sure you're just as tired as any Indigenous person who has taken up the gauntlet of another struggle. You're just as tired of the bullshit, excuse my language, of the Canadian government, who are supporting the rights of corporations. They're not supporting your human rights. They could give two hoots about your rights. As long as you don't even notice that they're cutting your funding to education, as long as you don't notice until it actually is in your face, as long as you don't notice what's going on in Parliament, they're happy. As long as you're looking at these reality shows, and this is no offense to anybody who likes reality shows. I don't watch them because I have enough drama in my community. I don't need to see drama on TV as well. And is there an organizer here? Because you're going to have to stop me. I'm a Mohawk. We can go on and on and on and on. But it's okay. Just tell me. Eventually I'll get to questions. I'm alone here, so I've never been alone up here. So you're just going to have to help me with this, okay? One of the things that I think is really important that you know is the Canadian Human Rights Commission, when there was Section 67, which was going to be applied on reserve, and it actually was applied many times. But the government talks about balancing collective and individual rights. And so the government of Canada does not believe in the collective rights of Indigenous peoples. They don't even believe in the right to consultation. I don't even know what they actually believe in other than creating jobs, temporary jobs, to destroy and contaminate the world. But the Canadian Human Rights Commission, in January 2008, during the repeal of Section 67, talked about human rights being dual in nature. Both collective and individual rights must be protected. Both types of rights are important to human freedom and dignity. They are not opposites, nor is there any unresolvable conflict between them. The challenge is to find an appropriate way to ensure respect for both types of rights without diminishing the other. Balancing those rights. You know, a lot of times we hear that if it's in the public's interest that a development will go on, that Indigenous people can fight. Yeah, you're welcome to come to the Supreme Court of Canada. You're welcome to come to the provincial courts, which is where we have to start. But if it's in the best interest, so let's talk about Energy East. Let's talk about Enbridge. Who here would agree, and you don't have to put your hand up, but who here would agree that this kind of development is not in the best economic interest and security of Canada? So we're trying to balance, okay, what's in the best interest of Canada? The state, the thieves. That's what I'm going to call it, the thieves. And again, I mean no disrespect, although it probably sounds like it. But the thieves who have appropriated our land, who have killed our children in the name of that land grab, who base their rights to sovereignty on an archaic doctrine which has been denounced by the United Nations. They're basing this all on a lie. Your children and every single person sitting in this room who's been through the educational system has been told a lie. So then when people like myself come up and say, no, this is actually what's behind the curtain that you haven't been seeing. They think that we're crazy and we're radicals. We're terrorists, we took over the community and blah, blah, blah. And yet they don't talk about the terrorism that was needed for Canada and Britain to create Canada the state by, as Audra Simpson says in her latest book, Mohawk Interruptus, it was a way of containment. It was a way that Canadians could be protected, and Andrea Smith has also said this. It was a way of making sure that the white settlers, predominantly white settlers, would have security from us. You know, the ones that you call savages in your history books. The ones you called uncivilized. That's what land's reserved for Indians. And then they had to say, well, we don't want white men living on this. And of course, everybody knows about the Kanienkehaka issue, right?
Yeah.
So you had to define lands reserved for Indians, and they didn't want white men living on reserves. And of course, it's a patriarchal culture. So they had to define who was an Indian, and it had to go through the male line, right? And they took away, while they did this, they undermined the roles and authority of women in our communities. They undermined the roles of the clan mothers in our nations. And they did this intentionally, knowing that this was the strength of our nations. And so when we look at situations, and don't just blame Kanienkehaka, because I've heard of DNA testing in bans in Alberta. I heard of a woman, an elder, whose husband died. She was a widow, but she was not from that community in Saskatchewan. And I forget the name. She was expelled because she was not a member of that community. She belonged to another community. So colonization, it's right here. It's right here in our minds. And it's because of the Indian residential school system. It's because when they replaced the Indian agent with the band council system, that it was done through coercion. It was done through cultural self-hatred. You couldn't have done it and said, look, this way is better. No. Because the ways of the Europeans and the Roman sons was really actually more destructive and more disgusting. They had to impose this upon Indigenous people through coercive methods. And so you had people, you had children, and I'm going to say this again, these were children that the churches and lay people, teachers with the knowledge of the government of Canada were doing to Indigenous children in school. So if they arrived in residential school and they didn't speak English or French, they were punished. And from my community, we heard of stories of needles being put in their tongues, of their hands being held over a hot fire. And many of our community members went to Shinwak Residential School in Sault Ste. Marie, which is very far from my community. And there was a dungeon in there. And when children were punished, they were strapped in that dungeon downstairs. Children. And so when we look at our communities today, and when these evil oil companies and gas companies and condo developers come in and they say, we have money for you people. They know that our communities are divided, first of all. They don't care what the root causes of that division and dysfunction are. All they care is about the money and getting what they want. But the dysfunction that you see in communities like Kanienkehaka, in places like right across Canada, that dysfunction is created by foreign governments, by settler governments, who, and I'm going to repeat this again, all they want is our land. They would be very happy if we just all shot ourselves and faded away and just became a footnote in history and just became a footnote in the Canadian Museum of Human Rights or the museums that are over here. And this is what we're talking about. We want reconciliation. We don't just want the survivors of this genocide, the living survivors, because many have passed away. We don't want just the survivors to talk about what they went through. We want Canadians to hear it. We want your children and your grandchildren to hear it in your schools. And we don't want any more dispossession of our lands. We want to protect the lands. And I really, sometimes I get really tired thinking about it. In fact, I get tired a lot of times, but as my friend Clifton knows. And I kind of wonder, what's it going to take for Canadian society, and where I come from in Quebecois society, for them to really comprehend the devastation of colonization upon our people. And I don't want to act as a victim. I'm not a victim. I am a human being, first and foremost. I am Turtle Clan, and I am a Kanienkehaka. I am a descendant of the first peoples of this land, the first peoples that saved the skins of the Europeans who came here and didn't know this land, who were sick themselves. And for us as Indigenous people, our identity is totally linked to the land. Our languages are totally linked to the land. You know, one before me must have walked. That's where my connection is. That's where my true heart is. And again, it's almost as if when we show what is precious to us, the colonizers, the settler governments, and these corporations want to take it away from us. They don't want to have real reconciliation. They don't want to have true respect for our rights to self-determination. And we're not asking for it either, huh? We're not asking for your permission. We're saying, this is our land, and we're going to share it with you. But you have to understand that that means you have to ask us before you cut a tree. Yeah. You have to ask us before you start contaminating anything. Because we're here to look after the land, not just for the human beings, the wahua, but for all our relations, for all those four-leggeds, the birds, the medicines that we pick on the ground, for the water spirits, all those relations that we depend on to keep us alive. That's what we mean by sharing. We don't say, look, here's a plot of land. Do what you want. We'll turn away. We won't look and see what you're doing. No, we're saying we want to have a say over what you do. Build your home. Fine, build your home. But it has to be done in a respectful way. Kanienkehaka is Katsitsakwas, so that strength, love, and respect. Those are the things that Kanienkehaka is based upon in order for a person to have peace. And if you don't have peace within yourself, you're not going to be able to have peace with other people, and you're not going to be able to have and carry on those messages to future generations. How am I doing for time? Anyone? Did anybody? No, okay, nobody's going to help me here. Okay. You can go for a break if you want. But I want to go back to the UN Declaration, and the thing about the thing that people say is aspirational. You cannot use the UN Declaration by itself. Just like you have to use, when you use domestic law, there's other things that go with it. For Indigenous people, we need to use the UN Declaration as an argument in line with our customary laws. There are things that perhaps it's not perfect, but the Declaration, I think, for us, is going to be a tool to be used because it's there and we can use it. It's not because we don't want to use it. I know there's people that are against the Declaration, and that's their right. But it does have diverse legal effects because it is made of legal obligations that many states of the UN have. It's comprised of the International Covenant for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. It's comprised of the Covenant on the Social and Political and Cultural Rights. And any Canadian court can use the Declaration in its interpretation of any case, if people so decide. But I want to read to you a quote, an interesting quote from the Honorable Rosalie S. Abella, and there's quite a few quotes that you might like. It'd be good for T-shirts and posters. And it's from International Law and Human Rights, The Power and the Pity in 2010. Silence in the face of intolerance means intolerance wins. And this is for Stephen Harper and Peter MacKay and all his ministers. Indifference is injustice's incubator. And it's not just what you stand for, it's what you stand up for. And we need more than the rhetoric of justice. We need justice. It's really important that we understand when we do protests that we think about the safety of the people. So a lot of times I see people with children going to protests. I've seen some agitators in there, you know, they'll throw a snowball or they'll start something. And, you know, if you guys that want to do that, want to have your own protest, just say up front, this is what we're going to do. But for the protesters who want peace, who want to demonstrate to the other people who have not yet converted to your way of thinking and who don't understand that corporations are actually running the governments. You need to be really clear and to have peaceful protests. Because peaceful protests, as the Human Rights Council at the UN has said, can contribute to the full enjoyment of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. But it seems like in this day and age, if you speak out against an injustice, for instance, if you speak out at the war in Gaza, you must be an anti-Semite. And that's not true. When you look at the pictures of war, and it doesn't have to be in Gaza, it doesn't have to be in the Middle East, it can be here in this country. As the young, and I'm sorry I forgot her first name, the young woman, the Fontaine girl that was recently found. You just need to look in your own backyard to see what injustice does. It's not just bombs and guns that kill. It's indifference, it's colonial laws, it's these apathetic governments who think about the next election, and so they're going to go and gravitate towards the right, if they've got the money, to give them their election platform. So it's really about changing the way we think. And I just want to talk one more thing before I open it up for questions, and that's the issue of education. The government gives each province and territory money for the curriculum that is taught in our schools. And I want to make this really clear for all you taxpayers out there. Your money is not paying for our education. It never has, it never will. Your money does not pay for our social assistance, does not pay for anything in our community. Those funds come from a trust fund that was set up in 1886, thereabouts. And the former Auditor General of Canada, Sheila Fraser, will confirm that if you look in her reports. We want, as our elders said in the 1970s, Indian control over Indian education because we're frickin' fed up with being told that we're not good enough, we're not civilized enough, we don't speak your languages good enough, or we don't even speak our language because it's been told that it's not good enough. In 1924, the government of Canada made the potlatch, I think it's in 1924, potlatch, and they outlawed my government, our government, the Iroquois Confederacy, and they went to the longhouses in Six Nations and they killed a clan mother. That is the ferocity of colonization. That's what it's done. That's why people are scared to say, well, you know, we're going to wait for Ottawa. And then on the other hand, they've adopted Ottawa's mindset, but they don't want Ottawa to interfere. But education is one of the most important things for us to decolonize our people, so that we're not fighting about who's living in whose people's homes. Because it's not about who you fall in love with, it's about your right as a human being to start a family and to educate your children in their language, with their culture, with their customs. Because Lord knows we've had all kinds of cultures and customs come from across the ocean who have no clue, who disrespect us, who say, why is a woman talking? Well, I'll tell you why a woman is talking, because in Iroquois culture and law, it's the women that hold title to the land, and we are in charge of protecting the land. And no disrespect to any band councillors. The band council system only gets its authority from the government of Canada. It was a system designed to replace the Indian agent. It now kind of administers the funds that our communities have. So we're talking about education, and education is really, really important thing, because any kind of education as well. But education as the expert mechanism on the rights of Indigenous people in their study on education said, is an indispensable means of realizing Indigenous people's right to self-determination. It includes traditional education, or ways of learning and institutions, integration of Indigenous perspectives and languages. And one of the things that is not really funded at all is our languages. And so it's not enough to say the survivors are getting a monetary compensation for what they suffered. It just didn't happen to them. It happened to our communities. And I've heard of communities where there were no children. Can you imagine communities where there are no children running around and no children there for you to comfort or to hold? And like children are a good medicine, huh? They love you unconditionally. They'll come running to you and they'll hug you if they know you. Hopefully, they're not doing this to strangers. But that's one of the things that got me through the crisis afterwards was, having my nieces and nephews and just playing fun, becoming that child again yourself. We all need to do that. We all need to not take ourselves so seriously. So forgive me if I did today. But I think I've spoken long enough. And it's a great pleasure to be here. I want to thank the translators. I hope I didn't speak too fast for you. Sometimes I get carried away, but I want to thank the translators. And I want to thank you all for coming.